The bobcat watched the boat ramp all morning, sitting at the edge of the reeds like a carved thing in the mist, and by the time fisherman Wade Mercer finally set down his tackle box and went to see what it kept staring at beneath the dock, he understood with a cold, sinking certainty that the animal had not been waiting there by chance. It had been waiting for someone to notice. The morning began before sunrise at Lake Briarton, a long, narrow reservoir tucked between low wooded hills and old farmland, the kind of place locals favored because it had two decent base coves, a concrete public launch that rarely got crowded on weekdays, and enough cattails and broken shoreline to keep the fish moving even when the bite was slow. Wade had been coming there since he was a teenager and could back a trailer straighter than most grown men by the time he was 16. At 48, he still preferred the early shift on the water. Thermos coffee, a flat cap pulled low against dawn wind, and the sound of an outboard turning over while the rest of town was just waking up. He was broad-handed, quiet, and patient in the way people often became after years of doing repetitive work well. During the week, he ran a small welding shop in Hartley Cross. On Saturdays and spare mornings he fished, partly for bass and crappie, partly because the lake was one of the few places where nobody needed anything from him for a few hours. That morning he arrived just after first light to find the ramp mostly empty, the water silver-gray under a low ceiling of cloud, and a thin ribbon of mist hanging over the reeds near the floating dock. He killed the truck engine, stepped out, and immediately noticed the bobcat. It sat on a patch of gravel and wet grass beside the riprap, maybe 30 yards from the ramp, facing the dock and the reed bed beneath it. Not moving, not hunting in the ordinary stalking sense, just watching. Wade stopped with one hand on the boat strap and stared. He had seen bobcats around the lake before, usually quick glimpses at dusk, slipping across fire roads or hugging the tree line. But they did not linger at a public launch once people arrived. This one looked like an adult female. Lean, mottled tawny coat, black ear tufts, pale muzzle, and she was close enough that he could make out the dark lines on her face. "Well," he muttered, "you're out early, too." The bobcat flicked one ear but did not run. Wade shrugged, finished unhooking the stern strap, and backed his aluminum skiff down the ramp. He kept an eye on the animal while he launched, expecting it to vanish as soon as the trailer clattered or the outboard coughed to life. It didn't, even when another truck pulled in 20 minutes later and two younger guys started unloading rods and arguing cheerfully about bait colors. The bobcat only shifted farther along the reeds and resumed the same fixed watch toward the underside of the dock. Wade noticed because it was impossible not to. Every time he looked up from tying a lure or sipping coffee, there it was, pacing 3 or 4 steps, stopping, staring, then sitting again. At one point it gave a rough, rasping call and moved closer to the waterline, then retreated to the same patch of cover when a gull swooped low. "That cat's weirding me out," one of the younger fishermen said as he passed Wade on the dock. "Probably after ducks," the other replied, though he sounded unconvinced. Wade said nothing. He pushed off and spent the next 2 hours working a weed edge along the North Cove with very little luck. The fish weren't cooperating, the wind shifted twice, and all morning he found his attention drifting back toward the launch. From the cove he could see the public dock in the distance, and, now and then through binocular vision sharpened by habit, the small shape of the bobcat still near the reeds. It should have moved on by then. There were people coming and going. Kayaks, one old pontoon, a father and son with minnow buckets, a county parks truck checking trash barrels. Yet the animal stayed. Around mid-morning, Wade idled back toward the ramp to retie and maybe call it a day. As he came in, the bobcat stood up abruptly and paced along the reed edge in short, agitated bursts, looking from the dock to Wade's skiff and back again. When he stepped onto the dock with his line cutter in hand, the cat let out another harsh call, louder this time. Heads turned. "Hear that?" the father on the dock asked his kid. "Wildcat," Wade said, watching the animal. The boy's eyes widened. Cool. Wade didn't answer. He was watching where the Bobcat was looking. Not at the people. Not at the fish cleaning station. Not at the trash cans where raccoons sometimes scavenged. It was fixated on the area beneath the floating dock, where reeds and drift debris had jammed against the pilings after the last storm. The dock itself was a simple county install: metal frame, plastic float drums, weathered planks, and a narrow hinge section at shore. The underside often collected weeds, fishing line, and floating sticks. Sometimes turtles basked in the sheltered pocket. Once Wade had seen a muskrat swim through there, but the bobcat's behavior was too intense for casual hunting. It paced to the exact same spot, peered toward the dark tangle under the planks, then looked at Wade and called again. "All right," he muttered, setting down his tackle box. He was not a sentimental man, and he did not think wild animals asked people for help, the way folks in viral stories claimed. But he knew patterns. He knew when something was wrong. And this was wrong. He walked the dock slowly, testing each board out of habit, and knelt near the outer edge where reeds were packed tight beneath the frame. The water under the dock was dark green-brown, stirred by wind and boat wake. At first he saw only the usual mess: cattail stems, driftwood, a half-submerged soda bottle, a wad of monofilament snagged on a bracket. Then he heard it, faint, thin, and rhythmic under the slap of water against float drums. A kitten cry. Wade went very still. He leaned lower, one hand gripping the dock cleat, and angled his head to listen. There it was again, tiny, desperate, echoing oddly through the hollow underside. He swore under his breath and flattened himself enough to peer through a gap between the reeds and the frame. In the shade beneath the dock, trapped on a mat of lodged debris above the waterline, were two bobcat kittens. One was crouched and crying, soaked and shivering. The other lay partly tangled in fishing line and reed roots near a float drum, moving weakly. Jesus! Wade pushed himself up fast and scanned for help. The county parks worker was 50 yards away by the lot, and the father on the dock was watching him now with a concerned look. "Hey!" Wade barked, already moving. "Call 911 and county wildlife if you've got the number. There are kittens stuck under this dock." The father blinked. "What?" Wade pointed under the planks. "Now, and keep the kid back." The bobcat, hearing the change in voices, darted closer through the reeds and paced so tight she was almost circling in place. She was close enough now that Wade could see wet mud on her legs and how hard her sides were working. She didn't charge, didn't flee, just watched every move with a wild, rigid intensity that raised the hairs on his arms. The situation was bad. The floating dock sat too low over the debris pocket for a person to reach straight down from above without getting half under the frame. And the reeds plus fishing line made a nasty entanglement risk. If the debris shifted, a kitten could slip into open water and drown before anyone grabbed it. Wade shed his jacket, pulled a folding knife and line cutters from his tackle bag, and looked at the parks worker who had jogged over, radio in hand. "You got gloves?" The man, Nate Ellery, nodded and handed over a pair of heavy work gloves from the truck. "Sheriff and wildlife notified. EMS 2, just in case. What do you need?" Wade glanced at the dock's shore hinge and frame. "Need to keep people off this thing, and maybe a push-pole or boat hook." Nate sprinted for the truck. Wade dropped to his knees and stretched one arm under the dock, but the angle was wrong. He could touch only the outer reeds, not the kittens. The crying one backed farther into the debris mat at his movement, tiny face streaked with muck, while the weaker one barely lifted its head. The mother bobcat gave a ragged call from the reed edge and slashed a paw once at the water in frustration. Wade looked at her involuntarily. "I see 'em," he said, feeling foolish and deadly serious at the same time. "I'm trying." He needed a better angle. The quickest option was his skiff. "Nate!" he shouted as the parks worker returned with a boat hook. "Hold this dock steady and keep folks back. I'm going under from the boat side." The father helped without being asked, pulling his son farther up the ramp and warning arriving boaters to stay clear. Wade shoved his skiff alongside the outer edge of the floating dock, tied off loosely, and climbed in with the boat hook, cutters, and a landing net. The Bobcat shifted position through the reeds but remained near the same spot, eyes locked on the underside of the dock. From the lower angle in the boat, Wade could finally see the kittens clearly through the reed tangle. They had likely crawled or been carried into the sheltered pocket, and then become trapped when wind-driven debris jammed tighter around the float drums. The stronger kitten was tangled by one foreleg, in fishing line looped around a root and dock bracket. The weaker one was pinned behind a wedge of sticks and reeds, its back half damp and dangerously close to the water. "Hold her steady," Wade called. Nate and the father braced the dock from shore and the hinge section, reducing the wobble from wake. Wade lay across the gunwale, shoulder protesting, and used the boat hook to gently pull aside reeds. The mother bobcat made a harsh pulsing sound and rushed the edge of the reeds, then stopped just short of the open water. "I know," Wade muttered. "No sudden moves." He cut the first line strand with the line cutters, then another, working blind by feel around the stronger kitten's leg. The kitten hissed and bit weakly at the metal jaws. "Good sign," Wade said through clenched teeth. "Stay mean." The final loop snapped free, and the kitten lurched sideways. Wade dropped the cutters, slid the landing net under it, and lifted quickly before it could fall through the debris. Water splashed his sleeve. The kitten weighed almost nothing, all wet fur and trembling anger. He passed it up to Nate, who wrapped it in Wade's jacket with both hands shaking. The crowd at the ramp, small now but growing, let out a collective breath. The mother bobcat surged toward the reeds nearest Nate, vocalizing sharply, then backed away when he stepped clear and lowered the bundle onto a dry patch of grass near cover. She did not retrieve it yet. Her focus snapped back to the dock. There was still one inside. The second kitten was worse. It was wedged deep against a float drum where a branch fork had pinned the debris mat. Wade could reach it only by sliding farther under the dock frame than he wanted, face inches from rusted brackets and old line snarls. "If I go in, keep this boat from drifting," he said. Nate nodded grimly and grabbed the stern line. Wade braced one knee on the seat, half lay over the side, and shoved his arm shoulder-deep into the cold, foul-smelling tangle. He felt reeds, slime, smooth plastic drum, then fur. The kitten was alive but limp. Its hindquarters were trapped under the forked branch and wrapped in line and roots. He couldn't pull it free without shifting the branch first. "Need the hook." Nate passed it down. Wade wedged the boat hook tip into the fork and levered upward while keeping his other hand cupped around the kitten's chest. The branch resisted, then shifted all at once. The debris mat sagged. Water rushed through the gap. The kitten began to slide. Wade swore, let go of the hook, and grabbed with both hands, pinning the kitten against the float drum just before it slipped into the water. "Got you! Got you!" He tore line free with his glove, ignoring the cut it left across his knuckle, and hauled the kitten into the net. This one did not hiss. It only shivered once and lay still, breathing fast. Wade's stomach twisted. He passed it up and climbed out of the skiff in one wet, graceless move. "Warm towels," he said to no one in particular. "Keep 'em quiet." A deputy arrived with lights flashing as if on cue, followed close behind by a county animal control officer and, unexpectedly, a wildlife rehabilitator named Dr. Lena Sorrell, who had been nearby on another call. Lena knelt immediately by the kittens, gloved hands deft and calm, assessing breathing and temperature, while the mother bobcat paced in the reeds 5 yards away. "Both alive," Lena said. "Cold, stressed, but alive. This one's weaker. We need a quick reunion if the mother is staying and non-aggressive." The animal control officer eyed the bobcat and then the crowd. "We clear everyone back first." Deputy Marcus Hale moved people away from the water line. Firm, but not unkind, while Nate and the father helped create space. Wade stood off to one side, soaked to the waist, hands cut and muddy, watching the mother cat. His heart was still pounding from the moment the debris shifted. He had pulled plenty of things from water over the years. Anchors, motors, once a deer carcass with a winch, but never anything this small that felt so close to being lost. Lena lined a plastic tote with dry towels from the park's truck and placed the kittens inside without a lid, then set it in a quiet patch of reeds near where the mother had been pacing, partially shielded from the ramp by cattails. "Everybody back," she said. "No voices." They retreated to the concrete ramp and waited. The lake seemed suddenly too loud. Gulls, outboards in the distance, wind nudging the dock. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the bobcat emerged from the reeds low and fast, pausing at the tote to scan every human shape on shore. She leaned in, touched the stronger kitten first, then the weaker, and made a soft sound so different from the harsh calls of the morning that Wade barely recognized it as coming from the same animal. Both kittens answered with thin cries. Lena exhaled slowly. The mother licked the weaker kitten repeatedly, then picked up the stronger by the scruff and vanished into a denser patch of reeds near the shoreline willows. She returned less than a minute later, more cautious now, and lifted the second kitten after another long lick across its head and back. When she disappeared with it, the crowd stayed silent for a few breaths, as if no one wanted to break whatever fragile thing had just happened. Wade finally rubbed a hand over his face and let out a rough laugh. Nate looked at him and said, "I'm never going to get anyone to believe this if I tell it wrong." Wade glanced toward the dock, then to the reed bed where the bobcat had vanished. "Tell it right then," he said. "Cat stayed here all morning till somebody looked under the dock. That's the story." The official version, once reports were filed, was as practical as it needed to be. 2 wild bobcat kittens were found entangled in storm debris and fishing line beneath the public dock at Lake Briarton. Bystander and county staff assisted in safe retrieval. Licensed rehabilitator assessed and facilitated immediate reunification with the mother. Area temporarily cordoned off. Public advised not to approach wildlife. But at the bait shop and diner, the story grew legs before lunch. By evening, people were saying the bobcat had guarded the ramp and picked the fisherman and waited for help like she knew. Wade refused to dramatize it, though even he admitted the sequence gnawed at the edges of his certainty about what wild animals noticed and remembered. He knew only what he had seen: the pacing, the fixed stare, the repeated calls, the way the cat stayed despite boats, engines, and people until the kittens were out. Later that week, county crews removed the worst of the debris from beneath the dock and posted temporary signs about discarded fishing line and wildlife hazards. Lena returned at dawn 2 days later and confirmed fresh tracks of an adult bobcat and 2 kittens along a sheltered shoreline cut farther down the lake, plus signs of normal movement and no distress vocalizing. "Best outcome," she told Wade by phone when Nate passed along his number. "You got to them in time." Wade thanked her, hung up, and sat for a while in the welding shop after closing, with the sound of grinders gone quiet and the smell of hot metal fading from the air. He kept thinking of the moment he first heard the tiny cries under the planks, and how close he'd come to ignoring the whole thing as just a weird cat. The next Saturday he went back to Lake Briarton before dawn. He launched alone, fished badly, and spent more time watching the reeds by the dock than his line. Near mid-morning, as the mist burned off and sunlight finally reached the ramp, he saw movement at the far edge of the cattails. A bobcat, likely the same female, standing half-hidden and looking toward the water. Beside her, for one brief second, 2 small spotted shapes flickered through the reeds and vanished. Wade smiled despite himself and tipped the brim of his cap toward the shoreline like an old fool. Then he turned back to his rod and the quiet slap of water under the dock, carrying with him the hard lesson the bobcat had enforced without ever coming close enough to touch. When something wild keeps watch longer than makes sense, stop what you're doing and look where it's looking.